Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from around the world. Welcome to this launch event for the admin data for tax justice, which you can find at the taxjustice.net website and in all good shops. This is the launch of a new area of work that's building on, in fact, many years of work with tax administrations and partners around the world, bringing together both a database of the latest research and inaugurating a new network to take this research further. I'm delighted that you've joined us. I'm going to hand to my colleague and the Tax Justice Network's head of research, Dr. Miroslav Polansky, also of Charles University in Prague, who's been leading this this initiative and can set out just exactly what we are indeed launching today. So, Eric, please.
Thank you so much, Alex, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll just share the slides real quick. Right. So it's very exciting for us to be able to launch the initiative that we are calling Admin Data for Tax Justice, where we try to advance the use of administrative data for tax research, which is not a new idea to use administrative data for tax research. I have actually searched for the first ever mention that I could find of the use of administrative tax data in research. And it was in 1696 by Gregory King, where he has used public registers and assessments and accounts kept in the kingdom, meaning the United Kingdom, which is the first well-documented use of administrative level data. Of course, today, the world is very different, and a data section might look something more like this from a paper on the entire population of Norway, which is very traditional in papers that you see coming out now from Scandinavia, which has kind of been at the forefront of using administrative level data. But why would one want to use administrative level data? Well, the simple reason is that for many research questions out there, the administrative tax data at the micro level are simply superior to the aggregate and the macro data that don't allow you to answer the type of questions that we would like to ask many times in tax research. And they have also been used in collaborations with local experts, which really helps it make create valuable lessons for policy. And so they have also been correspondingly kind of increasingly core to our research at the Tax Justice Network, mainly since 2019, where we started our first such collaboration in Nigeria. Today, we have collaborations underway in many countries of the world and working on many more. And hopefully, that's also something that this initiative will kickstart for us, but also for a lot of you. Now, what we also saw while working on the different administrative level data sets is enormous heterogeneity in the models of accessing this data. And so we saw that many of these collaborations were based on largely informal networks, a friend of a friend, an acquaintance from prior studies, etc. There was vast heterogeneity in the types of contracts that one needs to set up, the levels and the ways that the data is anonymized, the ways that the results that we produce are kind of being disclosed to the public, and so what the procedures for that are. There were also inconsistent data structures and documentation that we saw around the world. And so ultimately, we felt like this led to a vast kind of duplication of work across the countries and the research teams working on this data, or in, I would say, even a majority of cases, lack of enough work that could be happening using this data, because the value of it seems enormous. And so why are we launching this initiative now? I have two charts to support the notion that administrative level data are really at the forefront of academic research on tax, which come from the website that we are launching today. And the one on the left shows you the number of papers that have been published that use administrative tax data over the years that we have in the sample. So you can really see how in the last 4 or 5 years, the number of published papers has skyrocketed. It is also that, sorry, many countries of the world are now using or providing access to researchers to their administrative level data. We have papers using data from 65 countries in the database, and more than 500 people have contributed to it. Excuse me. So how do we go about using administrative level data? We feel like the field has really outgrown these ad hoc arrangements that we saw in various cases. And we also saw kind of clear cases of best practices in the various aspects of the collaborations. We also saw many cases where, thank you, there was a clear lack of guidance in some of the steps that are needed. And so we came up with a couple of things or ideas for what we need to create successful collaborations. And we think that the first one is networking, getting to know people, getting to trust them. The second is to share best practices around the different aspects of the work. The third one is producing guidance, producing documents of this best practice. And then we thought it's also useful to map the field. So who has worked on what and in which countries. So what we're trying with this initiative is to do just that. We are focusing on all of the 4 areas. And we have lots of partners that have joined us in this endeavor so far. And we hope to have many more, perhaps from the attendees, the participants of today's webinar as well. And what the initiative does is kind of collecting these 3 aspects of using administrative level data into one central resource that is now available today at this website, admindata.taxjustice.net, that I will show you in a bit, where it has 3 main kind of aspects. One is the global research mapping. So you have seen some statistics from that already, which tells you about which data is being used and where. And also we hope that it helps to identify the research gaps. So the papers that have not yet been written, the data that has not yet been used in this way. The second is that we would like to share on that resource the best practices for access and collaboration models. So we see this work as kind of being classified into 3 pillars. The first one is access and governance. Kind of how do you get access to the data? How do you set up the contracts? How do you create memorandums of understanding, etc.? The second is on data readiness and infrastructure. So how do you make sure that the data that is sitting currently with the tax administrations is ready for use by researchers? How do you set up the right types of infrastructure? And then the third aspect is sustainability and incentives. How do we make sure that the collaboration models work for everybody involved? And the third aspect is what we are actually doing today as a first virtual event of the initiative. And also tomorrow and Wednesday here in Prague with the first in-person gathering of the initiative, which is putting together an active network of people, of stakeholders in the collaborations using administrative level data. That is mainly researchers and the government agencies, so tax administrations, ministries of finance, statistical offices, etc. And also the policy actors, so that we can work together to create the evidence base for better policy. So let me now go to the website to show you around a little bit in the last couple of minutes that I have for this. Almost there. There we go. So I encourage you all to, of course, go to the website that we've set up and explore yourself. I just wanted to show you around on the different all the different pages that we have. So the first one is the database of papers that you can scroll through. You can go to a detail of the paper, you can check out the abstract, you can open the paper. All of these things are also clickable. So if you click on the country, it gets you to the filtered view of papers using administrative level data from that country. You can filter by year, you can filter by journals and by authors. We have a news section where we will try and announce everything, all the news related to the network. So here you see information about this very event that we are on now. This is the in-person workshop that is going on tomorrow on Wednesday. We are really hoping to expand the third page of the website on data labs, which would show the list of the data labs. Currently, it's very small. We know that there are many more, and we are working on adding more. We would appreciate very much your help here by submitting information about the data lab that you have been involved with. As I said, we have a growing network of partners supporting this initiative, and we would like to grow that network further. And then we have a stats section and an about section, where in the statistics section, I'm quite excited about the lineup that we have here. Because if you search for some of the names on the panel, you can quickly see the papers written by those authors and the countries that those authors have used. You can also zoom in. So we see that Anette's work is very much focused on Scandinavian data. So without further ado, I would invite you to join me and listen to the panel of great speakers that we have with us today. Back to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, Marek. So Marek showed you there a set of the partners supporting this event and the network. And yeah, as he says, we have 5 really great speakers representing a range of those partners. So in order, we have the order I'll ask them to speak. We have Abdul Muhit Chowdhury, who is a senior program officer at the South Centre and has really led the work of the South Centre tax initiative that's been so important in bringing tax officials together, as well as generating policy research around some key questions. We have Anette Alstad-Setter, who's a professor of economics at Skatteforsk, the Centre for Tax Research, who's done some of the most, apart from anything else, the most high-ranking publications on that use tax admin data that have really changed people's understanding of the type of tax abuses that are going on in Scandinavia, but not only. Then I'll come to Giovanni Occhiali. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Apologies, Giovanni, I should have checked. Who works with the International Centre for Tax and Development in the UK, which was one of the first, well, effectively is a think tank, a research centre that really began driving forward some of these questions from when it was set up in the early 2010s. Then we'll hear from Kat Belitska, who's the Lars Peter Hansen Associate Professor of Economics and Statistics at Utah State University, and I'm very pleased to say a Research Associate of Tax Justice Network. And then finally from Pierre Bacchus, who's a Senior Economist at the World Bank and also works with the European Union Tax Observatory, again, a key centre of research in this area. So we'll ask all of our speakers just to speak for 2 or 3 minutes around your sense of the potential of this launch, the database and the network as we move ahead from here. So Abdul, please.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Miroslav, and of course, thanks to the Tax Justice Network for really leading this initiative, which is really very valuable. And I would say that this initiative has 3 main value adds. So number 1, and I would say that's perhaps the main one, which is that the data lab section really provides a way to get access to the data by providing the email IDs and providing the contact details. It really opens up the space for researchers who want to use this tax administration data to get in touch with those tax administrations by clearly providing a contact, and that's very valuable. So that's number one. Number two is, of course, by compiling the papers themselves. And it's actually not that easy. And I commend the team for doing the hard work of actually putting all of that together. So for tax administrators, this is really valuable, not just because when they are designing policy, they can see what has actually worked, because a lot of the tax administrative research of that kind looks at how taxpayers have responded in response to various policies. So that a body of evidence can really help policymakers design better policies, but also to see how they can use their own data in carrying out their own research. So that's the second one. But even for the larger community, for example, at the South Center, as Alex mentioned, we work a lot with member states, we brief them, and our work is on international tax. But international tax is, I mean, ultimately in some ways domestic tax, because you have to have domestic laws on how to tax multinationals. So that sort of research is really invaluable. I mean, I was looking at the database at some of the papers on responses to wealth taxes, some of the responses to R&D incentives, some of the responses to tax treaties. I mean, that's really valuable to compile that evidence in one place. And then the third, I would say, is the network. And I know the first meeting is going to be tomorrow, and it plans to be a sustained effort. And that's really important because, as Miroslav said, gaining access to this kind of data really requires trust by the tax administration, because there are a lot of confidentiality concerns and so on. And for that, it really helps to, and the research community, it's not like you have millions of people. It's also a relatively small research community. So getting this small community together and having face-to-face discussions can really go a long way. Ultimately, this data is a gold mine. It's just waiting to be analyzed, and this is really very valuable in helping, as we say, genuinely evidence-based decision making. Last point I want to mention, Alex's recent book on what do we know and what should we do about tax justice has such a fantastic literature review. And I was wondering where Alex, found the time to go through all of that. But after looking at this website, I think that has really contributed to that fantastic literature review. So with that, thank you, and over to the panel.
Thanks. Mentions of my book are not mandatory, honestly. Let me pass the mic to Annette.
Thank you. I really commend you for all the work you've been doing this. And also what I think is very valuable is putting the emphasis on best practice, as you do, like taking this work out of the Wild West and into organized forms. So that, because it's a gold mine of data and there's a lot of opportunities for researchers, but we also need to be mindful of trust for the tax admin, and also the ethical considerations, but also the personal data issues that arise. So having like a good way of dealing with these in a trusted and good manner, that is a big help for researchers and tax admins in going into this big route. And also, let's face it, there is a big risk for researchers, and particularly young ones, if you start such a collaboration with tax admins and suddenly there's a policy change and you lose access or whatever, and you spend years and you don't get anything out of it. And this can also help reduce that risk and also get more research and into this. And also having people like to have a network to ask people about questions when difficult issues arise, I think that's a big valuable contribution. And the last thing I want to emphasize is that we talk about how great this is for researchers and all the knowledge we can get and for policy, but let's not forget the potential increase in data quality within the tax admins, because there's a lot of raw data that are unused and not used. So having like somebody to look at the raw data and analyzing them, both like getting the data out and having to document them, is kind of a big increase of inequality, and you can see many issues that may arise there and problems. But also when the researchers do the analysis, there is kind of an increase. If you can also do that in close collaboration with the tax admin, there can be an increase in competence and learning within the tax admin how to use the data better. And also what we haven't experienced, like there are bugs in every tax admin, however well adapted they are in data and in digitalization, like bugs exist. And so having the tax researchers also to question when things look either too good to be true or like very strange can also help correct the data internally and correct bugs. So I think this is it's a kind of a dialogue that is kind of good, and then both parties can win from this. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me pass to Giovanni, please.
Thank you, Alex. And again, also from my end, kudos to all of you at TJN who put this together. It's a great resource. And I think it's very easy to come after Annette, because I think she really stressed a lot of the very important things that this collaboration can contribute, which is to highlight what are the best practices in collaborating with Revenue Authority. When ICTD started doing work on tax administrative data about 15 years ago, it was very hard for academic scholars to collaborate with tax authorities from lower income countries, because many tax officials have been exposed to some extractive practices, which you also need to recognize exist within academia, of parachute scholars coming in, taking that and going away. And I think that was very much an obstacle in fostering more productive collaboration. And one of the things we did from the very start was to develop, together with colleagues from the Uganda Revenue Authority, a set of principles of engagement that we always follow when we collaborate with research partners. Most of our research focuses on Africa, but we have now done various pieces of work in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in India, and we always bring forth the same type of approach, which is ensuring that we only start working on administrative data after we have developed an MOU and a joint work plan with our partners, and we always do our best to include co-authors, because as Annette mentioned, it is very important for any researchers involved in this world to ensure that they understand the data better. Because if I start working in the countries where I've never been, clearly all of my colleagues from the country will have a much better understanding of the data generation processes. And at the same time, I know it also maximizes the chance that whatever evidence is produced through the work is actually used into policymaking. When you have a co-author on the study that is actually from the place that then has to use that evidence for something. I think it's also very important, especially from the academic perspective, to ensure that you can allow the time that policy requires to develop and be implemented. We always maintain editorial control over our studies, but we have also more than once embargoed them for a number of months. If you're working on a live reform that changes because of the study we are doing, then you have to accept that has to take priority on publishing the work. So there's a lot that can be learned. And I think one of the other things that I noticed as I was scrolling through the database is that there's a variety of different things that can be done with tax admin data. They can be combined with survey work. They can be combined with focus group discussion, with ethnography. Once you start really thinking outside the box of what it is that you can do with this data, there's a lot more than the type of more economic academic work that was done in the past. And we have collaborated in the development of criteria to identify networked individuals in a number of countries based on administrative data. Some of this work, might be considered some type of second-class academic work, but for the live experience of colleagues in revenue administration is often the type of work that they are the most interested in carrying out, and eventually they can carry it out on their own without having someone coming in from the outside. So I really think that there's much that can be learned from each other in the way in which we have all engaged in this work, and I really commend TJN for this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Giovanni. Let me pass to Kat, keeping it within TJ.
All right, so it's kind of hard to go after everybody has said so many wonderful things, because I think I don't want to sort of repeat, but let me just echo some of the sentiments in the room and sort of say some of the more personal thoughts on this. So I'm glad that Mirek mentioned UK data at the start. This was my introduction to the administrative data as well, though probably not in 1600s. But this is where I started, and sort of I do kind of appreciate the conversation about informal networks, because this is how most of my access to administrative data sets was also built. I have worked with very many different admin data sets, and all of the collaborations were introduced through sort of, oh, somebody told me that they have access to this data. And so I am really impressed with this initiative, and I really hope it works out for all of us, that we can introduce new researchers also, not just the existing ones, to data sets, but also new people, bring new voices and new opinions into sort of trying to analyze the data and trying to think about the implications that data sets have, and the collaborations with local tax authorities on the ground have, not just for us academics. I would love to have another 5 papers published, but for also people who are on the ground working on these issues, so that we can provide them the sort of more forefront analysis of the data and help them make policies that will actually help their own countries. And we're not just self-serving ourselves. And I think having more people from different backgrounds working on this data set will help do that. And let me add something that perhaps no one mentioned, but I can, as an editor of International Tax and Public Finance Journal, I see a lot of papers from developing countries come through my desk, and I would like to see more people from these countries working using administrative data sets, rather than sort of, your standard World Bank or IMF macro level data sets. I think these admin data sets have a lot more potential, and I would love to see more of those papers come through my desk, because I would love to learn more about these countries, be it more descriptive or less descriptive. More of that work is needed. So thank you so much, guys, for launching this initiative.
Thanks, Ken. So let's hear from Pierre, and then I'll come back with some questions. We might even call for Q&A. But Pierre, please.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Miroslav. So I think a lot has been said. So let me, give a bit of the World Bank's perspective. I've been here for about 8 years now in the World Bank, and it's true that there was, when I started, it seemed like this kind of work was only feasible in Denmark and Norway by Annette, basically. And so, that has really changed very fast. Some of it is due to technology, digitization, and so on. But I think also we've seen something quite remarkable, which is not just catch up, but I would even say some leapfrogging. And these days, when I look at the lab in South Africa, what's being done in Uganda, it's really remarkable. And they're setting best practice and a level of transparency and openness that probably beats these days Norway, Denmark, or France. So that's really remarkable. I wanted to mention one other effort. So Honduras has just started, actually last month, a data lab that Miroslav, you might want to add. And it's a very nice story, because it really comes from the work of my colleague Thiago Scott here, who did his whole PhD working with them, and kind of build slowly kind of the capacity there. And I think, the envy to start something like that. And so now, he can tell you more. And that's one more country where anyone from outside could apply with a research project. So really kudos to you. This website it allows us to enter kind of in a new phase of meta-analysis and cumulative evidence building. I think that's very exciting for science a bit more generally. So well done, Miroslav, Alex, and really to the Tax Justice Network. And I think it's good to keep in mind, we had a bit of this feel already with some of the other speakers, but academic incentives and the publication process, they're skewed in a funny way. They lead to kind of starification very often, which is not that useful when you're really trying to think of policy advice and when you talk to people, where we really need painstaking synthesis of evidence across many contexts, multiple studies, and also an effective narrative, which in academia we can kind of get away without one, right? Well, when you're actually trying to change policy, that doesn't really work, right? What I can tell you, sitting first with my World Bank hat, is there's a big increase in demand for this type of work, and especially for this kind of co-creation work, where we work without taking the administrative data, but rather how do we establish workflows via GitHub, via exchange of code, and so on, to create policy-based evidence with admin data. At the World Bank, because there was so much demand, we grouped ourselves together in this practice group called DATAX, and we're very proud, I'm representing them today, but also many other researchers like Anne Brockmeyer, Thiago Scott, Dario Tortarol, and so on. And so we would be very happy to partner with this initiative, and to the extent we can use our networks also to build this community of practice. The other thing you said that's a great contribution is that, I think we're going to see also with the new database where we lack some evidence, maybe. And there was the mention of the ultra wealthy, the very top economic actors, the multinationals. I think, skimming through the database, there's still, I think a lot we need to do there, in part because, we often think of admin data as one thing. And for a lot of people, it's the personal income tax, the corporate income tax return. But there's this whole wealth of newer data, the CBCR and the CRS and the beneficial ownership registries and so on. And so that's going to be exciting, but it's also taking us to that frontier that requires really deep collaborations and tracks with tax administration. Putting up in my other hat here, with the EU Tax Observatory, we've tried that with Brazil's Receita Federal. I think that has been actually quite successful, but it's a very heavy process. And I think there's a objective of this new initiative by the Tax Justice Network to really build such long-term collaboration so that we can go past just a simpler data set. So I want to finish by saying, so there's much work ahead, I think. I see this as, the starting point. I hope, what would be a success, I think, from this initiative is that in a few years when you have another event, most countries will already have a dedicated head of research and policy data analysis within the tax administration or Ministry of Finance. And I was looking online, I know there's already some people, I saw Zira Farouk, for example, right? So it's great that these are being built, but not only will they come to these events, and they will be in attendance and want to co-create, I think, research. And to finish, someone said that, there may be a time where tax administration can do it all by themselves. In a way, that's great. But I think, researchers will always have a role to play in pushing the envelope in new questions, in new data. And so I think I really see this as more of kind of a synergy that has to happen. So thank you, Alex. Thank you, Miroslav.
Thanks, Pierre. And look, thank you all for sticking very, very well to time. That gives us a nice bit of time now to go into some questions. And Pierre, perhaps I might start with you. I like the idea of looking in the database to identify where there are gaps. But I think there's another side of that, perhaps, which is also identifying where we can see research that can normalize for a tax authority the idea that it's okay to do this sort of research. And I think that, there are political reasons why there perhaps aren't so many studies around the most wealthy individuals. Because it's just more difficult for tax authorities to say, yeah, let's look at these guys, and you'll know that from the very important study that happened in Uganda, which I think did the ICTD work. It really kicked off some thinking about, this is okay, we can this is all right to do. But yeah, I want to ask you, you talked about some different obstacles there, but I wonder what you think the biggest obstacle really is that's still preventing, because on the one hand you can look at the database and say there's a lot in there, and there is, but in the grand context of the kind of the whole research field, it's still pretty niche here. So I wonder what you think the big obstacle is to this kind of exploding. We could be doing this research, there could be 17 researchers doing this in every country, and we'd eclipse what's already being done very quickly. But that's not happening. And I wonder why you think we're not there yet, or if we'll never be there.
Thanks, Alex. So let me maybe mention, so one is obviously, the constraints on capacity first. I mean, my experience in a lot of developing countries has been that the goal of a tax administration especially is to collect revenue right now, with very close targets. And so it does require a bit of a rethinking of a whole of government approach, could be coming from the Ministry of Finance, that actually data has value, and beyond just collecting revenue, right? So often my experience has been you have to approach a project and say, how is that immediately going to collect more revenue to meet my target in a year or two? As opposed to how do I plan a little bit for the medium term and do design policies better, right? And so I think only quite forward-looking administrations have been going there, and that's a hard constraint to solve, right? That actually it requires multiple point of entries, and I think again that's where the World Bank or the IMF have a role to play often by connecting these actors and showing that the Ministry of Finance should have access actually to the microdata, because it's not just about designing tax audits, for example, right? So that's the more institutional constraint. There's one on the researcher side though that I think is getting slowly lifted, which is if you look at most of the papers you have there, there's still very much papers about taxes using tax data. And that's fine, that's kind of natural. But I think there's a whole set of papers that could come out, not just about taxes, but because tax data is often the best data source, and that's true for trade, for jobs, for entrepreneurship. We're starting to see a few of those examples. I'm not sure you have them all in the data set. I could come back and discuss to Miroslav. But that's very exciting because that would really make this data, first the standards, that apply to this data much higher, and then much more demand. And I think once you've done this, it takes the tax data out of just being something the tax administration needs to use. And again, I want to mention South Africa, I think, as a great example from what I understand. Well, it started within the tax administration. My understanding is they want to use this lab for more than just taxes and bring data on education, on other government programs and so on, right? And so that seems like to me the gold standard.
That's interesting because South Africa also has a history of using very fine geographic data to understand inequalities in a way that puts other countries to shame, and maybe there is a pattern there. Giovanni, I actually have a question for you, but do you want to come in on this?
Just very quickly, because I think there's one thing that Pierre said is very important on the researcher side, and I think that's also a question of the incentive within the academic community of publishing something very quickly too, the type of work that's required to acquire the trust of a revenue authority to do work on politically very sensitive issues is significant. So it is a luxury to have a year and a half to spend to build the connection in a place where you might already be working, so that it becomes feasible to access and build a particular type of data set. Even in countries with a data lab, you don't necessarily find the data that you need to do studies on a net worth individual in the data lab. We are trying now to connect data from a revenue authority to a beneficial ownership registry in one of the countries where we work, which is also proving to be a very long-term endeavor. We've been at it for over a year and we aren't quite there yet. So it is exciting to know that there's more and more countries. I also saw in the list of participants someone from the Zambia Revenue Authority who has just opened a lab a few months ago. So that also another one that needs to be added to the list. So I do hope that the more some of the data required is already available in the data lab, the more it will become easier to also make asks of Revenue Authority to maybe add the other couple of variables you need. About boards of directors or shareholders that might not be what is made available to everyone in the data lab from the start. So it's a luxury from the research and sites to have the time to engage in this type of processing.
So I think it builds on that. I was thinking, the Uganda Revenue Authority case and the work that you did at ICTD and how that built over time, including into politically more difficult areas of work. That feels like there's a basis in that. You talked about the principles that you established then and how they were then taken to work with other research authorities. It feels like there's a bit of work to do that would be beneficial for an enormous number of people in kind of codifying some of that. So I suppose the question is, how do we design access and governance frameworks that more or less guarantee both the protection of confidentiality and the space for researchers to deliver the kind of credible and policy relevant evidence that we all need? Do we have that already? Could you write that down, or this is a work in progress, and then how do we get there?
So I think some of it can be codified. We have our principles of engagement are on our website. We've always made them public, and they've been adopted by UTF, endorsed by UNU-WIDER. So I think that there are a number of good practices that can be codified. I think there needs to be really an effort from it has to be a true partnership, right? Academics need to understand that policymakers work under a different imperative. Revenue generation in the short term, showing the impact of the work that they engage with external bodies, and at the same time, revenue administrations have to understand that we also, as academics, often work under the pressure of grants that expire at a particular time, and we need to be spending, our funding within a particular time framework. So there is to be some effort in aligning this. I think it's very important also to build in, structure to present preliminary results of the work as you go along, especially for politically sensitive work, so that by the time that the study is ready to be published, everyone within the authority has already been made aware of what the outcome of the study will be and has started taking steps to address whatever sensitivity there might be. So it is two worlds with different practices and imperatives coming together and working together to achieve, goals that will be in the interest of everyone. And for as much as one can codify some of the practices, it also relies on goodwill and sincere understanding of each other's situation from the partnership, which again requires the type of long-term engagement this type of initiative can probably help fostering in the future.
Thanks. Let me come to Kat. So, Kat, I remember when your paper on the UK came out and sort of blew the doors off. Not least for people who don't know it, because it implied a much higher rate of corporate tax abuse or revenue losses to corporate tax abuse in the UK than HMRC's own analysis suggested. And I think you got quite a lot of pushback for that, if I remember rightly. Although, of course, your research was completely sound. But that kind of, as you said earlier, that came about through a more or less informal networking that gained you access. Now we have the HMRC data lab, and in theory, at least, things are much more structured, and people with reasonable claims to access and good research plans should get access. But I wonder if, well, firstly, if you think that's how it really is, but also more generally, how do we move? Because we know there's a set of places where the access to data is probably dependent on a couple of personal relationships only, perhaps even if there is a data lab, but certainly where there isn't. So how do we think about moving towards kind of institutionalizing these partnerships? And I think both in low and high income countries, in some ways, I wonder if actually higher income countries, the tax authority sometimes ends up being more political and it's more of a challenge. But I don't know, what's your reflection?
Okay, so let me pick up the first half of the question first. So my access to UK data set came about through the Oxford Centre for Business Taxation, as my advisor, Michael Devereux, was working with HMRC to kind of start some of the pilot projects using this data. So I was one of the first people, in like a very dingy HMRC data lab that moved like 5 times since then. And the access was very sort of like, oh, hello, I'm here to do some work, versus what it is now, which is very formal. You badge in, you badge out. And the sort of the project approval process is a lot more formalized. So that's for sure the case. Let me just tell you one thing about working with tax admin data. When I started, the HMRC asked me to present their very preliminary findings to their tax admin people to kind of start a conversation about whether we're looking even at the same things when we're thinking about tax avoidance. And when I presented some sort of very basic descriptive facts, I was told that it's impossible, that the staff hasn't looked at this data. And I was like, well, I have. Did you find these things? And they were like, oh, no, we didn't even know how to find multinationals in our samples. And so it was just a very basic sort of I was a researcher. I've never worked in tax administration. I just came in and matched some external data set and found which firms were multinationals. And the tax administration already was a little bit like, oh, this is a huge leap forward. And I think obviously since then things have changed. That was maybe some 10 years ago. But it was, to me, just this very simple action of bringing external data and sort of helping the tax administration a little bit figure additional things out. That was already a big thing. So that's the first part. About institutionalizing access, I actually agree with what you said, Alex, which is that it is almost monumentally harder to get access to some of these administrative data sets in places like US than it is in places like all the countries we talked about today. UK for me was easy just because my advisor was working with the tax authorities. I work with US data. As a non-US citizen, it's nearly impossible to get access to it outside of working with somebody from the Treasury, basically. And I think then it underscores hugely the value of informal networks, because you met somebody at the conference who was willing to kind of help you access the data, meet with some treasury people, and start collaboration. So I think, the sort of the focus on developing countries here, while interesting, it looks like we can actually build a lot of these networks with these countries, whereas I feel like with the US, oftentimes it's really difficult to kind of start a collaboration. I don't have as much experience working with developing country data sets. My only experience is working on a paper on elasticity of taxable income, which basically just engages researchers who are already working with developing countries administrative data. Like World Bank has been instrumental. So thank you so much to Pierre at the bottom of my screen right now for making some of these data sets available to us. But again, this is informal networks, not formalized. I've never tried formalizing anything, so perhaps I'm the worst person to ask about that, Alex.
No, that's very interesting. I'm reminded that every time we have a kind of step forward in the exchange of financial or tax relevant information between countries, somebody in a high income country will say, look, you want to be careful here. The first time that there's a leak from the tax authority in a low income country, this is all going to get shut down. And that's why we must insist on these very, very rigorous confidentiality criteria that stop lots of countries getting any access at all. I suppose there will be a point when the first leak or the first identification of a taxpayer, presumably a multinational, individually, might happen through some kind of research collaboration. And maybe we should already be thinking about, obviously we're talking about confidentiality measures to stop it, but perhaps we need to think about, the response when that situation occurs, as it may do. At the same time, we're obviously, you mentioned the US, and we're seeing the US breach all sorts of precedents by having the tax authority provide data to immigration authorities and others in ways that, really might have seemed unthinkable not very long ago. So I guess things are moving quite quickly and not necessarily in good ways around this. But more positively, let me ask Annette. I want to ask you this question because I know you've really worked across lots of different angles, different authorities, and at Skatteforsk, obviously you have lots of different angles to the work you're doing. So a lot of countries have really rich administrative data, and where they link it together, including going from the tax authority to others, which might be customs or ownership registries or so on. Sometimes that's really valuable. Maybe always it is, but only when we ask the right questions. But if we were to make you queen, which of those linkages, which are the ones that you think really should be prioritized? What is it that would make the biggest difference to the kind of evidence that we can generate, the kind of policy change that we could see if you could wave your wand and join up any of those data sets? Where do you think there's kind of the most to gain?
Ownership data. Generating and recording ownership data, linking individuals and firms. Because one of the big issues, I've been on tax complaint boards and everything, one of the big challenges we have, like at least where I see, each firm is a separate legal entity, a legal person, as you say. And you can change that. You can establish firms like with basically free, at no costs. And you can run with no cost. And you can set it up. You can get the VAT refunds. In Norway, they happen like almost on the day. You just send in a claim, you get money back. And it's all of that. And it's kind of opacity tools. And you can set it up in rows. And there's no way of keeping track. And that was one of the main issues that, like before, we as researchers could link all of these things and use them. And the tax admin could not, because they were not, like many public sectors, are not allowed to merge with data from other sources due to GDPR fear. Like not founded, I think. It's kind of just very restrictive lawyers who say, no, this is dangerous, and become kind of a decision part. But there is room within the GDPR, you just have to want to do it. But I also see that one of the entry points for fraud in very trust-based, highly digitized, automated systems is basically becoming a firm, coming into the firm registers, being registered in the VAT registers, because once you're in, it's all automated. So not even for the big registers being able to do quality check and sanity check and seeing the history of this is basically a gift packet for fraud and eroding the welfare state. So I would say collect gather and use ownership data. That's kind of super important.
That's fascinating, and would very much chime with what somebody like Andres Nobel, who leads our work on beneficial ownership. What he finds in the ways in which anonymous ownership allows all sorts of things. Please.
Yeah, I'm like super enthusiastic because I bring it back to what you said about like thresholds, because these are the caveats. Like, and what are the problems for using the admin data, and that is mainly as you said, the conditions for using them by the providers, the OECD, the information exchange, the CRS, and like when you have these big restrictions. Is it so that what we call is increase in transparency isn't just increase in opacity? Because yes, you have bilateral exchange of information, but we can't use it. And that brings me to what commenting on Pierre said. What are the next big questions? So we have national tax admins who have national authority, but you don't see what goes beyond the border. So that also is a caveat for what we can do with the admin data. Because remember, they are collected for tax purposes. We can see what the taxman can see. But if we want to analyze response to the taxes, we also have to see what are the unintended consequences where people try to hide it, and then we have to use these international data and see and there I think like what the OECD is doing and giving this basically, and the tax agreements that basically makes this has to be confidential, you cannot use it for anything, and that research isn't supposed to be tax purposes. I think that's just outrageous, because we do have bring light in how to form tax policies, but it's basically kept inside. So that's kind of the next frontier. I know you've been working very well on this, but also getting the authorities to acknowledge that. So yes, there's a lot of questions we have not been able to answer yet, and we should also be aware of the limitations in the data that we have.
Thanks. Put in mind of the idea of pushing for a global asset register through the negotiations of the UN Tax Convention and trying to join up both private and public data for some public access and some for authorities only, which it is still a pipe dream, but it's a pipe dream that's a lot closer than it was 5 years ago when we kind of began that conversation. But I want to ask Abdul a question exactly about the UN Convention, actually, because Andres Nobel actually the other day was pulled out some old kind of statements of principles that he'd worked on that we thought might have a place in the convention negotiations. So this is the Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. And we just wondered if within that might be a place to basically establish a set of principles and commitments for tax authorities in terms of how they deal with information, including things like sharing tax information with other authorities within a country, but also perhaps how they share data with researchers, that this would be part of international tax cooperation broadly defined. And certainly we've had a lot of negotiation debate on points around this. So I wonder, Abdul, if you think, because I know you're closely following the UN Convention, is this somewhere that we could, almost have a bulk update to the kind of conditions under which tax authorities work with data? Or might there be some risk here that I'm overlooking?
Yeah, thank you for that, Alex. I would say that the principles of the Framework Convention as of now are largely expected to be copied from the terms of reference with minimal modification. So I think putting in this kind of a big change seems a bit difficult as of now. And the commitments are already, you already have a draft. I mean, that's what they were discussing in Nairobi. And you do have an Article 6 on mutual administrative assistance. But my sense is that this sort of regulation, broadly speaking, which kind of governs how tax administrations share data and so on, that would likely come up in a future protocol, either on mutual administrative assistance or exchange of information, something to that extent. There's been some discussion of having a new article exclusively within the commitments and a new article exclusively for exchange of information. So in case that takes traction, then that could be a place where some of these ideas could be put in. So that's what I would say for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Abdul. Yeah, I wonder if there might be a little room there we should explore. look, I know we're coming up to time, and I want to hand the mic back to Merrick, who's really done, who's led this process, this initiative forward. And so I'm going to ask you the last question, Merrick. If you look ahead 5 or 10 years and think about kind of where you'd want to be, right? In the question I have here, which I think you wrote, what would a mature global ecosystem for administrative tax data and research look like? And what role should initiatives like admin data for tax justice play in getting us there? What's your dream?
Thank you, Alex, and thanks everyone for all the interventions and answers. I think that the ultimate goal of all this that we're doing is that we want more of it. I want the chart to grow exponentially from where we are now. We are just at the beginning of of this work. We have lots of ambitious ideas about that go beyond a database, a mapping of research that's doing it. We could do events, we could do convenings of sharing best practices in regional convenings, etc. So I'm imagining a large network of stakeholders of various sorts, where it is completely normal for a researcher to apply for access if he sees or she sees an interesting reform, and it does not kind of rely on informal networks that are fragile and are hard to get for especially early career researchers or people that have not maybe been so established in the field. So that's where I think we're headed, but we want to help get there.
So one last question. Can you tell us in a minute what the event in Prague this week is going to be and what you hope will come out of that?
Yeah, thanks. So it's a 2-day workshop in person where we're convening a group of 35 people, roughly from, I think, about 20 countries from all sorts of corners of the world, where the main idea is to bring together the two worlds that have for so long operated in silos, largely, and that is the academic researchers working with administrative data and the tax administration staff that is actually providing access to that data. So we have not convened the high level political representatives of tax administrations who would like to boast their profiles with showing up. We wanted to invite people that actually work with the data, that get their hands on it and are working on those issues on a day-to-day basis to ultimately come up with a set of kind of foundational best practices or ideas of how these collaborations should look, and to base those resources on actual experience of people rather than just our thoughts.
Oh, your thoughts are always valuable. Look, thank you all. That's been great just to kind of kick this around a bit and get a bit of a sense of what we've got and where we might be going. I encourage everyone to check out the database and send us new papers, tell us what we've got wrong, what we've missed, how to make it better. Join the network if you'd like to get involved. The door is fully open. But for now, just about within time, let me say thank you all for joining us, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.